The year is 1300. A poet walks into hell. His guide is a dead man, and the first thing they find is not fire, not demons, not screaming. It is a castle, green meadows, soft light, and the greatest minds in human history, sitting there in silence, not because they were evil, because they were born too soon. This is Limbo, the first circle of Dante's hell, and it is the most theologically radical thing Dante wrote, because the people here, Aristotle, Homer, Socrates, Virgil, were not condemned for anything they did. They were condemned for when they were born, before Christ, before baptism, before salvation was even a category that could apply to them. Dante did not invent limbo. The concept existed in medieval theology, a space on the edge of hell for unbaptized infants. But Dante took that narrow theological corridor and blew it open. He moved the greatest pagan thinkers of antiquity in with the infants. He built them a home, a beautiful one. The church had never sanctioned anything like it. In Canto 4, Dante describes hearing no cries of pain in limbo, only sighs, not suffering, but longing. The souls here can reason, think, feel, remember. They know heaven exists. They know with absolute certainty they will never reach it. And they have been sitting with that knowledge for centuries before Dante arrives, and will be sitting with it for centuries after he leaves. The punishment in limbo is not physical. It is intellectual. These are the greatest minds who ever lived, and their torment is the permanent awareness of an answer they cannot reach. Dante designed a hell specifically for thinkers, a place where your capacity for understanding is precisely what makes the deprivation unbearable, arguably the cruelest circle in the entire poem. Almost every summary of the Divine Comedy skips past something that changes how the whole poem reads. Dante's guide through hell is Virgil, and Virgil does not guide Dante from a position of safety or authority outside hell. He guides him from inside limbo, where he has been since his death in 19 BCE. The man showing you the path to salvation is himself on the wrong side of the threshold. Every time Dante looks at Virgil with admiration, and he does repeatedly throughout the poem, we are watching a man who will never be rewarded for what he gives. Virgil leads Dante through hell, through purgatory, all the way to the threshold of heaven. Then he stops. He turns back. He cannot go further. Dante chose a guide who cannot make the journey himself, and never explains why he found that arrangement acceptable. Why Virgil? Not only because he was Rome's greatest poet, because Virgil had already written about the underworld. In the 6th book of the Aeneid, Aeneas descends into Hades and walks among the dead. Dante treated that poem as a map. He read Virgil's fictional underworld, decided it was close enough to the real one, and walked into it with Virgil as his guide, the student leading the teacher through the teacher's own imagination. When Dante and Virgil arrive at Limbo, 4 souls come to meet them: Homer, Horace, Ovid, Lucan, the great poets of antiquity. And they do something that appears nowhere else in the comedy. They invite Dante to join them. He becomes the 6th in their company. Dante, writing about himself in the middle of composing his masterpiece, places himself in the canon of the greatest poets who ever lived. He did this in 1300, before he had finished the comedy, before anyone outside Florence knew his name. The audacity of that move is easy to underestimate. Dante did not position himself as a student of these poets. He positioned himself as their peer, and he buried it so deep inside a theological meditation on salvation that readers have been debating whether to take it seriously ever since. The castle Dante describes in Limbo has 7 walls and 7 gates. Scholars have argued for 7 centuries about what they represent: the liberal arts, the virtues, the planets. Dante never explains. He describes a lit space, open, luminous and high, and leaves the architecture to haunt you. A building designed with symbolic precision, whose key was never provided. Inside the castle, Dante lists what he sees: Electra, Hector, Aeneas, Caesar, then the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, then Euclid, Ptolemy, Hippocrates. Then, near the end of the list, 2 names that would have stopped a medieval reader cold: Avicenna and Averroes, the Islamic scholars who had preserved Aristotle's texts through the centuries when Europe had lost them. Dante put Muslims in the honorable antechamber of his Christian afterlife. This was not an oversight. In 1300, the Church was in active theological conflict with Islamic scholarship. Dante's inclusion of Avicenna and Averroes alongside Plato and Aristotle was a quiet argument that truth belongs to whoever pursues it rigorously, regardless of which god they prayed to. He could not say that directly, so he said it by placement. To understand what makes Limbo genuinely dark, you need to know about the harrowing of hell. Christian tradition holds that shortly after the crucifixion, Christ descended into hell and took certain souls directly to heaven: Adam, Abel, Noah, Moses, Abraham. It happened once. Dante mentions it because Virgil was there when it happened. He watched it. Virgil tells Dante about it himself. He was in Limbo. He saw Christ arrive. He saw the patriarchs taken. He watched them leave. And then the gates closed. Everyone remaining understood something that offers no comfort whatsoever. That was the only time. The gates will not open again. Virgil has been living with that knowledge for over 1,300 years by the time Dante meets him. Aristotle has been in Limbo for over 1,600 years when Dante arrives. He has watched Christ come and go. He has seen souls rescued. He has understood, with the same philosophical precision he brought to everything, exactly why he cannot follow them. And he has gone on existing inside that understanding because there is nothing else available to him. Dante calls Aristotle the master of those who know. The phrase is precise in a way that rewards attention. Not the master of those who believe, not those who are saved, those who know. In Dante's universe, knowledge is genuinely honorable and genuinely insufficient. The greatest compliment Dante could pay a philosopher is also, in the same breath, an explanation of why that philosopher is in hell. Here is the theological problem Dante was walking into, and the Church has never fully resolved it. If God is just, how are souls punished for circumstances they had no control over? Aristotle did not choose to be born before Christ. He could not have been baptized. He did everything a good person living in his time and place could do, and it was not enough. Dante does not resolve this. He presents it in full and moves on. He weeps in Limbo, the only person in Canto 4 who shows visible emotion. Then Virgil asks him to follow, and they descend into the lower circles, where the suffering is louder and easier to categorize. Dante leaves the hardest question exactly where he found it. Consider who Dante was when he wrote this. In 1302, 1 year after the journey he describes, he was exiled from Florence, sentenced to death in absentia, his property confiscated. He would write the entire comedy as a man who could never go home, in a city that had declared him an enemy, When Dante wrote about permanent exclusion from the place you belong, he was not theorizing. The souls in limbo are exiled not by politics, but by metaphysics. They did nothing wrong. They are on the wrong side of a historical line they had no power to move. Dante knew exactly what that felt like, to be excluded not by your own failure, but by forces that arranged themselves around you before you had any say. He wrote Limbo from the inside. Limbo is also a political act, though most readings treat it purely as theology. Dante chose who goes in. Every inclusion was a canonization, Dante declaring, with the authority of a claimed divine vision, that these thinkers mattered, that their work deserved preservation, that posterity owed them something. He was deciding the intellectual inheritance of the medieval world, dressed in the language of the afterlife. He also decided the absences. Lucretius, who argued there were no gods, does not appear. Epicurus is not in the castle. Dante places his followers in the sixth circle of hell proper, among the heretics. The honorable space in Limbo is selective, and Dante alone held the selection criteria. No one gave him that authority. He took it. Scholars have argued for centuries about what Dante actually believed. Did he think Aristotle was genuinely damned? Or was the comedy a coded argument, using the framework of orthodox theology to smuggle in a more merciful position? Some read Limbo not as condemnation at all, but as the best Dante could offer in a world where saying the rest out loud would get him killed. Because Dante was not safe. The comedy was written while the Inquisition was active. He had already been exiled by political enemies. He could not simply write that Aristotle deserved heaven, but he could design a space so beautiful, so calm, so obviously dignified, a castle with green meadows and soft light, and leave readers to decide what kind of god would call that a punishment. The comedy was completed around 1320. Dante died in 1321 in Ravenna, still in exile. Florence asked for his bones back several times over the following centuries. Ravenna refused every request. His tomb is still there. Florence eventually built an empty cenotaph, a monument to a man whose remains they could not return because they had driven him away, and he had the poor grace to die before they changed their minds. Within a generation of his death, the comedy was being read across Europe. Within a century, Botticelli was illustrating it. Within two, Michelangelo cited Dante more than any other writer. The man Florence sentenced to burning became the foundation of Italian literature, and one of the most read texts in Western history. Ravenna still has the bones. Step back from the theology for a moment. What Dante is actually describing in Limbo, underneath the medieval framework, is a particular kind of situation. Suffering that has no moral cause. Good people excluded from things they deserve through no fault of their own. A universe that does not arrange itself fairly around virtue and effort. He put that observation at the top of hell, before the sinners, because he thought it was the harder problem. Most people know this place. Not theologically, structurally. The waiting room, the in-between. Not suffering exactly, but not moving either. You know where you want to be. You know why you are not there. And the clarity of that knowledge is precisely what costs you. Because you cannot tell yourself a story about it, cannot explain it as your own failure, cannot fix it. You can only sit with it. Canto 4 is the most honest writing in the comedy. Not the fire, not the frozen lake where Satan is trapped in the ninth circle. This, the quiet place where intelligent people sit with what they cannot have and continue to think clearly about it. Dante understood that particular kind of hell personally. He built it with more care than any other circle in the poem. When Dante and Virgil leave Limbo and descend into the second circle, the poem changes register. The souls below suffer in ways that are easier to categorize, easier to judge. Lust, gluttony, greed. The moral architecture gets cleaner. But Canto 4 sits above all of it, unresolved, asking a question the rest of the poem is careful not to answer. Why begin with the hardest question? Why not start with the sinners, people you can judge and move on from? Because Dante understood something about how a reader's attention works. If you want someone to feel the weight of what comes next, you first have to show them something they cannot dismiss. Something genuinely unfair. Something that costs them something before you have even told them the rules. The Divine Comedy is a poem about justice, the idea that the universe has a moral structure, that actions have consequences, that there is an order underneath the chaos of human experience. And it begins with the place where that structure breaks down, where good is not rewarded, where Dante himself weeps and cannot explain why. He needed that fracture at the foundation. Without it, everything that follows would be too neat. Dante and Virgil walk out of Limbo without discussing what they have seen. Virgil does not explain the castle, does not justify the souls left behind, does not offer consolation. He says only that they need to move, because above them the stars are turning, and time does not stop even here. They leave the question exactly where it was, ruthless restraint and entirely deliberate. 700 years later, the theology has shifted. The medieval framework is not how most people think about the afterlife, but the structure of limbo, permanent, painless, lucid exclusion, has not aged at all. If anything, it describes something more people feel now than in 1300. Dante gave a name to a condition that had existed long before him and has not gone away. What Dante built in Canto 4 is a psychological portrait as much as a theological one, what it feels like to be fully capable and structurally prevented, to understand the problem with perfect clarity and have no mechanism to solve it, to be Aristotle in a castle with green meadows in full possession of your gifts and unable to use them for the one thing that would matter. In the next episode, we go deeper. Below Limbo, the comedy becomes what most people expect. Passion, punishment, fire. Paolo and Francesca, the lovers who could not stop. The gluttons of the third circle. The hoarders and spendthrifts grinding against each other in the fourth. The full architecture of Dante's moral universe, circle by circle. None of it would carry the same weight without Canto 4 underneath it. Dante began the comedy with the line, "In the middle of the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood." He was 35, exiled, alone, standing at the entrance to a poem that would take him 20 years to finish. And the first person the poem gave him, the first guide, the first voice in the dark, was a soul who could not be saved, a man who knew the way, but not for himself. That is the image to carry out of Canto 4. Not the fire, not the monsters. Virgil, standing at the threshold, pointing down into the dark, saying, "Follow me." Having walked this road before, for other souls Beatrice sent him to guide, knowing he will walk it again, and knowing he will never arrive anywhere himself. Dante, 5 episodes, Join the journey through Dante's Inferno in the following episode. The descent continues.
Thank you for watching. If this video brought you any value, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. For more content like this, hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you next time.